Hi, I'm Shana Meyerson with the Yoga of War podcast, here today with IDF reservist Doron Keidar. If you appreciate and find value in these important discussions, please consider supporting the show so I can continue to bring you such amazing and esteemed guests. Details are pinned in the comments below. Doron Keidar has been defending the state of Israel since 2003. First in a combat unit, and then in the IDF Special Forces Reserves since 2017. But it's only in this most current war in Gaza that he's fought two simultaneous battles: the war against Hamas and the information war, which has been equally brutal. A convert to Judaism and a lifelong Zionist, Doron lives by the IDF moral code, the moral code of the Jewish people. His mission in life is to protect and serve, not to kill or destroy. In this war of good versus evil, of legitimate warfare versus terrorism, there's been so much moral confusion. Even a large swath of the so-called good guys don't even understand who the good guys are anymore. Today, Doron and I discuss the moral standards of the Israeli Defense Forces, what it means to be a soldier of faith, and what it means to have to fight in a war for your own survival. If you are a yogi or yogini who thinks there is any moral equivalence between the sadistic Hamas terrorists and the Israel Defense Forces, you owe it to yourself to listen to this discussion about what real life war actually entails, how religious values change the battlefield, and how the anti-Zionists have it all wrong. Doron Keidar travels globally to advocate for Israel, sharing firsthand insights from his experience defending the Jewish state. He currently hosts the Doron Keidar podcast and executive produce the I Am Israel, the Mountain of the King film project. Since 2003, Doron has served in a combat unit of the Israeli Defense Forces and has been in the IDF Reserve since 2006. With nearly 2 decades of EP security sector experience, he has contributed to the development of military and law enforcement gear, leveraging his IDF background and collaboration with Israeli and American security experts. Doron also works with Cry for Zion, a movement supporting Jewish rights on the Temple Mount, using historical, archaeological, and biblical evidence. Thank you so much for joining me, Doron, and thank you so immensely for your service.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, to start off our conversation, can you tell us a bit about your background? So, you're a fierce warrior and a faithful Jew. So, what are the major milestones that made you the man you are today?
Well, I would say that the milestones have been growing up in a Christian Zionist home that was very devout towards Israel, very supportive. My father was a World War II veteran, so he served in the Second World War in the submarine units. And literally, he never had to fight in the war. He was 15. He lied about his age. But because of his father's upbringing, that basically taught him that the Jewish people are God's chosen people and you have to protect them, then he saw it as his mission once he found out that Nazi Germany was trying to exterminate Jews, that he is going to go to war and he's going to stop whatever evil plan that the Nazis had in store for the Jewish people. So that was him as a young boy at 15 years old, a teenager, that basically left his home, left Washington, D.C., left everything he knew, and decided to go on this voyage with the Navy and be sent wherever they're going to send him in the world. And so he ended up in the naval submarine units, and eventually ended up in the Pacific wars, what was going on in the Pacific. So ironically, he didn't end up sent to Germany, which was his main motivation, but that's essentially what was the backbone of my family and education growing up at home in northern Israel. After my father, years later, through contracting, ended up in Israel, and it was actually his occupation that he learned in the military, which was electrical engineering, one of many um, uh, skills that he had learned during the war. And that's what led him to being part of the top contractors in Fort Lauderdale, Miami. And then a good friend of his from the war says, "Hey, Jack, there's a project in Israel. Would you be interested?" And he's like, "Absolutely." So he left his family, his wife, and his daughter who had just finished high school. His wife and my dad, basically his first wife, did not get along very well at all, according to what I heard from other people. So they really needed to separate. And of course, that unfortunately created a impact on my older sister, that her dad left her for Israel. But essentially, the parents just really were not getting along very well, and their visions were not aligned at all. So my dad literally left everything, left his home, left all the money, everything that he had acquired, and left that with his first wife, and came to Israel with nothing. And long story short, he ended up in Kiryat Shmona, a northern town of Israel, through his second wife, which was a Jewish girl who literally was just finishing her military service. And they bought a home together. And that was the home that I ended up growing up in years later with my dad's third wife, who was a Catholic. So essentially, we ended up being born and raised in Israel, my brothers and I. I was one of two twins, the firstborns from the third marriage, and my younger brother is 2 years younger. My younger brother, sorry, my twin brother, he's also my younger brother. I was the oldest out of the two. He died in a smoke fire in our home in Kiryat Shmona during one of the harsh winters that we had in Israel at the age of 2. And so that essentially really shaked the family fabric and basically took a toll on my father's and my mother's marriage. And just throughout the years, their marriage essentially deteriorated, where my dad basically blamed her because he was off at work when this happened and she was alone with us children. And by miracle, I literally survived from that smoke fire in my home because I was in the crib with my twin brother. So technically, I should have been dead as well. But by miracle, I made it. And that essentially, changed the trajectory of our family, like I said. And then we ended up, both my younger brother and myself, in foster care. And then we ended up in Haifa, growing up with parents that had completely different backgrounds, but ironically, they both came from the same cities in the same states in America, both the mom and the dad identical. So ironically, they at least shared the same histories in that sense, but as far as their occupations, it was completely different. My foster father was um, uh, he was a professor from, or just retired from being a professor at Fordham University for the performing arts. And he was also the guy who essentially found Denzel Washington and got him on his way to stardom. And right after that, literally, is when he left the whole Hollywood business, the whole stage productions, everything, and decided to move to Israel with his Jewish wife, who had been in, she had done some modeling, she was into music, she was also into performing arts. And so both of them highly educated, both of them into the performing arts world. And that's something that I gravitated to because of my mom's side. Her dad was a engineer for Ford in Detroit, Michigan, and so he was a really talented drawer. He would draw with like a pen. He would make these amazing pen drawings of farmhouses and different things like that, and he'd send them to us as children. And he also carved for us different carved amazing carvings that he had made. So I had kind of that in my family, the artistic side, and that essentially is what basically got me very much interested into the, well, I guess you say not necessarily performing arts as so much, but I was into photography is what I essentially gravitated to, other than sports, because I was kind of like this weird mix of super athlete, but also super into doing arts and just learning everything to do with painting and art history, etc., and all that kind of stuff. So that's essentially kind of what made the makeup of who I became as a young man, and got me started up till we ended up getting to where eventually I ended up getting married. So that's kind of the childhood years and teenage years that led up to that next stage in life.
So you were born a fighter, and you were born to a fighter. I mean
Yeah.
that in the most positive manner, just that you were born with a fire in your belly. Sorry, I no pun intended. And-
Yeah.
but that you really did follow in your father's footsteps to the extent that he was driven um by this compulsion to stand up for what he thought was right. And it's also interesting when you say that you have this artistic side, and obviously as a soldier you have this warrior side, that you really do have that very intact right brain left brain connection that feeds very beautifully into faith, because in order to have true faith, you have to be able to mentally and logically transcend to understand the concept of God, that I think people find so tenuous that they just give up on it. But at the same time that you have that intelligence, you have the artistic and softness, integrity to also submit to that higher power. And that creates like an extraordinary power on top of the physical power that you also clearly embody. Um, I'm wondering, so your father was a devout Christian Zionist, and
Mhm.
you grew up in Israel. I'm wondering what compelled you, and from what I understand, your wife as well, to convert to Judaism instead of just simply fighting for the Holy Land as a Christian.
Right. Well, it's kind of a long story, but the short version of it is so the family that I ended up with, they were actually heads of a Messianic congregation in northern Israel. And so that was something that just kind of naturally we moved into with our Christian upbringing. So it wasn't too far off. But at the same time, while we grew up in Kiryat Shmona, before we ended up in foster care, we also had very heavy influence from a Moroccan couple that took us to synagogue. We celebrated the feast with them. Basically, I'm like this white Moroccan kind of a kid, So even though I'm like ethnically Caucasian or from Northern America as far as my family and all that, but I'm really a Middle Easterner as far as my temperament, my food culture, a lot of the way I think, etc., is very heavily influenced from Sephardic, or as we know, also called Edot Mizrach Judaism. And so having that kind of a mix, and then essentially, my wife and I, when we got married in 2000, we left to go explore our own faith. So I actually went to Bible school to study religion and to learn more about the Christian faith, my roots, and where I come from, and really trying to connect with my faith. And but I was also exploring it from a Jewish perspective, because I guess the influence from the Messianic Judaism that I was also brought up in with the couple that helped raise my brother and I. And so we had some really, really good teachers at the school. And I remember one of them at the course for apologetics. Ironically, I was supposed to debate this redneck kid, like real country boy that the issue of the debate was pacifism versus the opposite position. And so it was kind of funny because I was the guy that did not want any attention. I tried to hide from being like the Israeli guy and not have everybody, draw attention to you, because it was a very pro-Israel kind of school, and they would pray constantly for Israel, and they were kind of Israel nuts, so to speak. And I was just really just trying to fly under the radar and be like, yeah, I'm the token Israeli, but I really don't want to draw any attention. And that was kind of the first time I was drawn out of the shadows, so to speak, of just trying to lay low and stick to my own business. Was when the teacher asked, he said, who wants to debate for pacifism? And the way he just kind of arrogantly threw his hand up and was like, yeah, I'm going to take that. I was just like, something inside of me was like, bro, it was that warrior spirit. I don't know how to explain it. I just kind of like, you know what? Well, I'm going to take the opposing side and I'm going to wipe the floor with you because um, it's like it's convenient for you in in North America, in European nations that haven't experienced war in over 500 years, to hold to a convenient idea of I'm not going to have to engage in armed conflict. That's convenient and easy and nice for most. Again, it's not most of the world, because that's the irony is you think that you're most of the world in the West, but you're actually the minority of the world. Most of the world has conflict. Most of the world have to either defend themselves and or be the aggressor, be the ones who are going to go and fight and kill other people because of their ideology. And so I came from the position of growing up in conflict, growing up with constant attacks from Lebanon and Hezbollah and terrorist bombings and friends that were murdered and killed. My mindset was real simple. And it's like, listen, you can maybe try to convince somebody about this idea of pacifism, but literally Christians like Bonhoeffer, for example, right, as one perfect example from the Christian world, he was a pacifist, but he left the comfort and safety of North America where he was touring. He was going on like an American tour kind of thing, and the war broke out back in Germany, and he headed back to Germany, not to fight for the Nazis, not to join the Nazi regime, but actually to oppose them. And this is one of the guys who was part of Valkyrie and other attempts to try to eliminate the fear of Germany, because they realized that that was a necessary action in order to end the war, right? And so I'm like, yeah, so you're going to tell me that you want to be a pacifist, which is easy, but what if somebody like a terrorist, like October 7th, they come into your home and they try to rape your wife, murder your kids, burn you alive, whatever? You're just going to let them do it and just hope to God that some, angelic help is going to come and save you? That's a fairy tale world that you're living in. So, so any case, I never had to do the debate, ironically, because we ended up moving back to Israel. But I think that really kind of got me thinking more seriously about my position on defense, on taking action, and not it has a not hiding in the shadows and being this introvert, which is very convenient for me to just not engage with people, not to create a ruckus. And it actually led to one of our first fights as a couple was when I wouldn't stand for my own. I wouldn't speak up what I wanted to say. I just kept it to myself. And my wife was just infuriated about it. She's like, if this is how you feel about something, you should say it, and quit just not saying anything. And so that essentially was kind of what laid the foundations for when we came back to Israel. And the reason why we came back was because of the 9/11 attack in the United States, which was a culmination of terrorist attacks in Israel. For me, my perspective versus everyone in America that were in shock. For me, it was a resolve that, you know what, I'm sick and tired of watching these terrorists butcher and murder my people, and now they're coming for the Americans. So I'm going back to Israel and I'm going to fight these terrorists and I'm going to do what I can to eliminate them from the face of the earth, because that's what needs to be the action that needs to take place. That's what needs to happen. If you want evil to be eradicated from the earth, then you need people like myself who are able to exercise violence against that evil. And that's the reality is that's a necessary evil, so to speak, in this world that people just perceive to be toxic masculinity or whatever their views on that is. But it's it's a necessity for society. I mean, you have to have people like myself who can stand up and can defend society from that evil. Otherwise, the terrorists, the communists, the Marxists, whoever with these crazy ideologies, they're going to take over society and they're going to do it by force. They're not going to do it by ideology alone. They're going to do it through force. And that has been proven from the first war, the second war, and every war in history that we know. If you look all the way back to Adam, that's just the reality of humanity, unfortunately, until we enter into the Messianic age, where the Messiah is going to essentially um, um, exercise order in the earth. But until then, people are going to have to stand up and they're going to have to fight for what is right. And so, in any case, so that brought me back to Israel. I started my military service, and then with all these questions and debates within me from Bible school time, I was being hit up by what we call Beinashim, Bnei Yeshiva, guys who basically are yeshiva students that also do their military service and then go back and continue their yeshiva studies. It's kind of the program that they have. And so a lot of these guys were older than most of the young guys that were getting recruited because of their yeshiva studies that they had to do first. And so they're about my age. I was 22 when I started. I was married for 3 years at this time. And that was back in March of 2003. And these guys kept hitting me up with all these questions, and I'm not used to sitting in a yeshiva and having to debate my faith per se. The Christian faith is way different. It's here's what we believe, and we don't really ask too many questions. And I guess again, that's to oversimplify it, but Christians aren't very good at, so-called debating their faith as much as Judaism is more asking all the hard questions, the uncomfortable questions, but basically challenging your position and why we believe the way we believe. And that's what these guys are doing to me, not to be mean, not to be rude, but simply like, seriously, like you haven't considered the why, the this, that. I'm like, bro, like,
Were,
I'm a simple dude. Like,
were there other Christian students at the yeshiva?
no, this is in the military. This is not in yeshiva.
Oh, I thought you said yeshiva. Sorry.
Yeah, my bad. Yeah. So these are what we call Beinashim. They're yeshiva students who are doing their military service. Not all religious Jews who are in yeshiva will actually do that. A lot of them will try to get out of military service because they want to stay in the yeshivas and study. But these are the Zionist yeshiva kids, the ones who are more about defending the land, but also studying Torah. And so they're a combination of both in their worldview. And so any case, these guys really challenged me, and it really worked on me a lot, so to speak, as far as just things I never really thought about, things I took for granted as far as this is what we believe, and that's it, and gave the short answer. But I was challenged to really think about what it is that our positions are, what I've been taught, what I knew to be true up until that point. And then a few years later, or about a year and some later, I ended up in a course called Nativ, which is a fast track conversion course that was for military personnel only, to give them a break, so to speak, from the long 5 year or however many year civilian process that you would do to do Jewish conversion. And so I went to the course and then came back home and I told my wife, I said, we're going to keep Shabbat from now on. And she's like, what are you talking about? I said, well, basically, I can't refute that is so-called done away with, which is a lot of the Christian view is everything within Judaism, because Jesus died, then he makes this famous statement, says, it is finished. So within Christian theology, they take that statement and basically say, all of the law is finished. Jesus lived up to the law perfectly. And after he died and was crucified, up until that point, until then, the law was supposed to be kept, but now no longer. Again, I'm giving an oversimplified answer to these. These are I can get into a very long discussion on explaining it, but just to make it simple for the viewers and the listeners are listening, the simplicity of the idea is basically the law is done away with. And that's one reasoning. And there's a few other reasons that Christian theologians give. I wasn't convinced of that idea at all. I came to another conclusion that the law does not contradict, or whatever Jesus was preaching and teaching did not contradict the Torah, did not contradict Judaism, but quite the opposite. He was a righteous Jew who upheld the law and promoted the observance of the law in the most perfect way possible, all the more so. And so that essentially led me to the path of basically feeling the need to fulfill my life as an Israeli that grew up here, that was going to raise a family here, that I wanted to raise up children that were God-fearing, they were Torah observant, and they were part of the strengthening of the Jewish society in Israel, that were Torah observant, without the baggage, so to speak, because I think that's something that a lot of people have a negative view from Judaism, is they'll look at the Jews in Mea Shearim or Bnei Barak, or not too far from where I live in Bet Shemesh, Jews that are living inside these clusters of these cliques, I guess you could say Jewish cliques, so to speak, that they have very little interaction with the outside world, and they also act, as far as social norms, they act very weird and different. And so people who get exposed to that are like, what's wrong with those people? And you see them on the planes, you see them on El Al, on the flights, and they act rude and obnoxious and whatever. And the assumption is, oh, that's Judaism. And I'm like, no, that's just a group within Judaism that live in a very closed society because they're trying to protect their children and their family from the outside influences. And unfortunately, the byproduct of that is weird social norms, I guess you could say, to really oversimplify it. And so for me, it was important that I would contribute to the religious Zionism that wasn't living in ultra-Orthodox communities, but I'm a part of the world that I'm living in. I'm part of Israel, and I'm also part of the greater world, so to speak, as far as being a voice and being a witness to the rest of the nations of the world, which I believe that's the mission of Israel, is, as it says, "Ol lagoim," to be a light to the nations. And so, so for me, it's both internal, but it's also external to the rest of the world, which is not very popular in Judaism of today. Jews like to keep their head down. We like to not, we're against conversion and all that kind of thing. But that's not my mission, is to get converts. My mission is to shine the light of Judaism in a most positive way I can, as an individual and as a family. And that's essentially what led me to the direction that I continued on when it was offered to me in the military.
Amazing. I'm going to get deeper into Jewish values a little later, but first I want to go back to just sort of your upbringing a little bit more, in even more broadly, just being brought up as a child in Israel. Education has always been a tremendously important cornerstone of Jewish life. Hard stop. Growing up in Israel and
Yeah.
now raising a family of your own, I know, I believe you're homeschooling your children, but
Yeah.
alas, when it comes to understanding the Arab-Israeli conflict, I want to know, because I know what I was taught here in America growing up in a Jewish day school,
Mhm.
which was nothing. It was literally,
Where was that, by the way? What part of the world of America?
I'm in Southern California, so it was in Orange County,
Okay.
California.
Okay. Right. So the West Coast gang.
Yeah, but I went to Chabad school. I went to
Ah,
ultra
cool.
Lubavitch school, and all I knew was that we had Muslim brothers and sisters. I always laugh because growing up, I kid you not,
Yeah.
I would be embarrassed to tell you when I actually realized that Jews and Muslims weren't the same thing. I literally thought they were Christian, and then there were Jews and Muslims, and somehow we were the same because all I ever heard
Yeah.
was Muslim brothers and sisters. I
Yeah.
know there was a war. That's crazy. But in the 80s, I mean, there weren't a ton of
Right.
um,
Right.
but so I want to know so you're about 10 years younger than I am. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, I'm curious what you were taught about the Arab-Israeli conflict in Israel,
Hmm.
and if that is at all different to how children in Israel are being taught today. And if you can take a moment also to contrast this to how the children in, say, Gaza, who are literally indoctrinated from birth that martyrdom and killing Jews is life's greatest honor. Is that how you were raised?
No, that's not how I was raised. Again, I was raised partially up until was it 13 with a War II vet, and he grew up in the 20s. And let's just say my dad's views on race or religion was very extreme because of that generation. So they didn't speak very highly of the other religions or other ethnicities, etc. So today, basically, you would say my father was a racist, but he wasn't because, again, I mean, he's this white dude with European descent that moved to the Middle East and lived amongst the darkest of Jews in northern Israel. And so in a way, he's like this irony, right, of that generation that, yeah, they would say things a certain way. And so I heard those things growing up, and so it kind of influenced the way I looked at, for example, Germans, right? So my first engagement with Germans, they were Christian Germans that came to Israel, and I was actually part of a youth camp with these Germans, and so it's Israeli kids, it's German kids, and it's Arab kids, Arab Christians, and we would come together in this youth group, not youth group, a youth camp, or I guess you could say a youth camp, and we spent like 2 weeks together, and just engaged with each other and learned about each other. And I remember that for me, that was the first time I was listening to the other side. In my mind, the other side being the Muslims, being those on the other side of that fence, or the ones who would carry out attacks and all this stuff. And I remember just asking them the hard questions of like, what the heck's wrong with you? Like, why are your people always doing this and this and this? He's like, well, first of all, I'm Christian Arab, and it's not my people, it's the Muslims, And I'm like, okay, well, then why? What's their deal? As kids, right? Teenagers, we didn't have any deep theological worldviews or whatever, and then talking to Germans and being like, wait, so you don't hold Nazi ideas, like you don't hate Jews? It just blew me away. You know what I'm saying? Because I grew up with a dad who was fighting the Nazis and they were German. So in my mind, there wasn't such a thing as a German that was a Nazi, just by default in my mind. And so that was, I know this might sound very stupid to a lot of people, but put yourself in my shoes in the mid 90s, and we didn't have the internet. And what I'm learning from the other person is by personal communication face to face. And so, yeah, you're going to ask some really stupid questions because, we're very ignorant to the other side and the other side's worldview. And so just hearing Germans tell me that, yes, my family had Nazi background, whatever, but I'm here with a different attitude, with a different worldview. I'm here to heal the wounds that my country did, that my ancestors did, and to see Germans in tears and repenting to me for what they did to the Jewish people, I was just like, okay, now I'm really uncomfortable. This is weird. Um, and it just helped me to understand the world that I lived in, that not everyone is this of this race or this culture or this religion. Not everyone is with the same broad stroke of what we have preconceived ideas of those people. And so simultaneously within Israeli society and when the school and whatever, this was something that also shocked me is when we moved to Haifa. Um, so Israelis living in northern Israel, they're more, as we call tachlis, they're more straightforward, in your face. They're not so politically correct. They're not very cultured, so to speak. They don't have the nice universities and the fancy theaters or anything like that. It's real simple people, farming people, builders, industries, whatever. not performing arts, not, too fancy kind of metropolitan kind of upbringing that you have. And that's where I grew up, is like the blue collar, so to speak, of Israeli society. And then I moved to Haifa, where it's these like, artsy fartsies. You have people that are into, theater and arts and this and that. And we're literally writing in class, we're writing, painting out peace notes to send to our Arab counterparts, to the Muslims who are trying to kill us, writing salam, peace, shalom in 3 languages, and painting it, drawing it, whatever, and sending it off to these. And I remember thinking to myself, are these people crazy? Are they out of their minds? Do they not recognize what the Arabs think of us and what they want to do to us? Because that's what I grew up with, is not being polite, so to speak, towards the enemy, calling out the enemy for what they are. And so it was combined with, like I said, the wishful thinking, the more leftist kind of Jew who just wants to think good about the world and just show kindness. And if we just sit down, have a conversation, we can resolve all these problems, not realizing that the other side isn't interested in conversation. They're literally interested in lopping your head off and raping your wife and your daughter when they're done with your wife. Um, I mean, I'm being very extreme here, maybe for some of the listeners, but that's the reality. And that's the reality that I grew up in. And I recognized that. And it was really blowing my mind out, sort of blowing my mind away, so to speak, having these contradicting worldviews and trying to understand what is wrong with people. Can't they just see things for what they are? And then again, having real conversations with Arabs and being exposed to the Christian Arab world and asking them, why are you joining in with the terrorists? Because I know you were throwing rocks, because I heard from your family that you were throwing rocks at IDF soldiers when they were entering your village. And they're just like, well, you need to understand. And then I realized they had a politicized view of Israel. That they justified their violence because of a political worldview, that the Zionist state of Israel is the problem. It's not Jews per se. And I'm like, yeah, but these are IDF soldiers. They're going on behalf of the state of Israel that we're a part of, that we live in. What is wrong with you? You know? And so again, I recognize that the Arab world as a whole that live here in Israel are influenced by the Islamist ideology and propaganda, all the way down to even the Christian community. And worst off, and the saddest, is that the Christian community are the ones who get the shortest what do you call it? The shortest end of the stick, or however you say it, in this whole conflict, because they're literally at the bottom of the barrel. They get bullied by Muslims. For example, Nazareth and Bethlehem, two of the most dominant Christian cities in the Middle East, in Israel, in the land of the Bible, since the time of Jesus till now, have always been like 90 to 80% Christian. Today, after about 30 to 40 years of Islamic bullying and influence and moving into these Christian cities, they have actually overturned it to where it's now over 80% Muslim in both these cities. One is in Palestinian control, which is Bethlehem. Nazareth is under Israeli control. So I take full responsibility as an Israeli, and we're actually petitioning the Israeli government through different organizations that are fighting for the Christian minority in Israel, and saying this is not right. We're allowing our Christian minorities to get bullied and to get terrorized by these terrorists. So, anyway, so that's kind of a little bit of that world that I essentially grew up in, and had to try to figure out and navigate between learning how not to hate my enemy, but to know where they're coming from, to know why they're acting the way they do, what's the influence, where's the root of the problem. And just like you point out, it's education. Whereas on the Jewish side, it's all about love, it's all about respect and loving thy neighbor, respecting thy neighbor. Whereas unfortunately in the and I'll say in general in the Arab community, um, and again, not coming from the Christian values, of course, because this is not at all found anywhere in the New Testament, and most Christians in this region would not be so anti-Israel if they weren't under the fist of Islam that is really controlling their daily lives. So it's really out of fear, I think, a lot of the way they react and the way they believe, and because of lack of seeing action from Israel to defend them. And that to me is where I think Israel can do much better in fighting for its Christian citizens that live in the state of Israel at bare minimum.
Yet another way that Israel is paralleling Europe.
Yeah, yeah,
Because,
yeah,
therein goes the West.
yeah,
These population dynamics are more than just birth rates, and people have to understand what the broader repercussions really are.
yeah.
Um, Johan, I'd like to get into your military service because there's just so much misunderstanding in the world. And you alluded to it earlier. I always say, because I come from the yoga world, right? The world of love and
Mhm.
light. And like they really like everything is like, oh, love will always win, love will always prevail, which is nice for a t-shirt. But the fact is, you hold hands, 1,000 people in a room singing Kumbaya in a circle, and there's one terrorist in the middle. You have 1,000 dead Kumbaya singers and one live terrorist. And
Yeah.
people can't seem to wrap their head around this when we're meant to be such an empathetic society, but because they've never experienced anything like this, all they see is a number, 1 and 1,000. Therefore, the 1,000 must be the problem. So anyway, let's go back. So like every Israeli, of course, like even as a young child, well, I know I've heard your story and I've listened to it many times because I'm like, wait, what, where, what, how, what? Like it's a puzzle.
Yeah.
You came and went from America, among other things, but you were a young child, growing up in Israel, which means that you were growing up with the knowledge that you would be a soldier someday. You opted to be a soldier ultimately because of the path your life took you back to America. However, it's always interesting to me, again, as Americans in the West, like we can't understand this concept of like you're 3 and you don't even question it. One day you will be a soldier, perhaps in battle, perhaps if you're lucky, not. Anyway,
Hmm.
so you chose to come back to Israel and enter the IDF in 2003, and you've been a reservist since 2006. Could you just briefly just tell us just a bit about like the actual combat roles you have played and in which wars and conflicts over the past 22 years?
Mm. Okay, so essentially, I joined during what's known as the Second Intifada, towards the end of the Second Intifada, and I ended up in the Givati battalions, where or brigade. Forgive me for the terminology. Again, my English versus the Hebrew um, equivalences is usually going to create a problem. So no stolen valor here. No trying to make up stories or whatever. You go ahead and try to translate everything from Hebrew to English, and good luck with that. So, so in Hebrew it's called Chativat Givati, right? It's a chativa in the IDF. It's one of the combat units of the IDF, and it is well, it is still today, but at the time also was part of the Southern Command. And so essentially, we were the Gaza unit. We were the ones who were mainly in charge of the Gaza Strip for operations and so on. And then any other units that would operate in Gaza, they were basically operating in our battle space, so to speak. So that's why I call it the Gaza unit, or the Gaza division of the military. And so we did desert warfare training, etc., and then leading up to deployment in defense of the Jewish communities at the time before the pullout in 2005 that were in the Gaza Strip. So in that first deployment, we ended up in some a lot of encounters with terrorists, uh, weapon caches, attempted terrorist attacks on Jews traveling in and out of the Gaza Strip to their Jewish communities. One of my commanders got killed in one of those interactions where basically they were giving faulty information by the girls that were watching the monitors, and they're trying to give directions of where the terrorist is coming from. The information was faulty, and essentially instead of flanking the terrorists, they were coming face to face with the terrorists, and he had a perfect silhouette from both my commander and his commander, who both fell in that engagement, and then we ended up eliminating the terrorists. So that was a real baptism in fire. Going to commander school, literally the night of, we came under mortar attack, and because we're going to school, we had to sign off our weapons. So this is the first time that I come under attack, and my first reaction is to go for my rifle, and it's like, oh yeah, no rifle. And it's like, well, let's just hope no terrorists enter this base right now, that we're coming under mortar fire, and you have a mortar landing just meters away from you, and you're just like, okay, this is getting interesting.
This was
And
Iron Dome.
what?
This was before Iron Dome, correct?
Way before the Iron Dome. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, there wasn't.
Just a sitting duck and no gun. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So exactly. So if terrorists would have entered that base, which they had done in the past, not that particular base, but they'd done to other bases, um, basically myself and the other cadets that were going to commander school were sitting ducks. And so it would have been some interesting hand-to-hand combat, but thankfully didn't get to that. And that was our, hey guys, now get on the bus next morning, go to commander school, and have a nice little learn how to be an NCO. So that was kind of the send off from Gaza, and that was just kind of our reality for anyone who was part of that time period. Just we were on a different level of combat and fighting than most of the rest of the military that was either in Hebron or in Jenin or any of these other terrorist hotbeds. Gaza was just a different animal because they were able to get weapons and munitions much easier because of where they were proximity to Egypt and through the smuggling tunnels at the time before it became tunnels all throughout Gaza like we have today. So in any case, went to commander school and then ended up getting sent out of Givati to the Home Front Command, where I was part of the first platoon of the first division, which today it's a whole division in the military of what's known as the Palchatsim, the search and rescue units. And basically what they wanted is combat trained soldiers that could help raise up both search and rescue guys, but also that could fight and do search and rescue in a hot zone, like for example, Gaza. And so essentially that was one of our first missions for my platoon, was just a few months after joining, that there was terror tunnels that they dug under one of our bases in Gaza. And literally I was in that base just months before with my platoon, with the Givati platoon that I was a part of. And we reported, because there wasn't such a thing as terror tunnels at the time, right? Like literally we were the first ones to report on it, literally the first ones to report on it, to my knowledge. And so I remember we reported to our commanders, they reported to the brigadier general, and so on and so forth, all the way up to chain of command. And each officer would come out there, they would listen, they go, yeah, I can hear something, it sounds like digging, you're right, but there's nothing we can do about it. So, it is what it is.
Wait, why was there nothing they could do about it?
Because imagine the concept of terror tunnels wasn't a reality. I mean, we knew that there are terror tunnels, so to speak, but not like that, not to where they were digging up to bases and setting explosions underneath the bases. Like that never happened. So that's what I'm saying is that they just were like, all right, maybe we're hearing from far away, from close. They didn't know what to do with it because we also didn't have the technology to deal with it at the time like we do today. So, any case, that base ended up being blown up completely by a massive charges of of explosives that they laid underneath the base through the tunnel. And I remember the eerie call that we got because I go, wait, what's the name of the base? I was like, holy crap, that was the base that we were in. And we even had a memorial to the fallen officer that, that I said, fell in combat trying to engage with that terrorist. His name was Leonardo, and so I remember that the Leonardo's memorial that we had built there, that was destroyed. Everything was destroyed, and it just was a very shocking reality of like, wow, so the terrorists have that capability too. Check, you know. And then shortly after that, there was a terror attack in Egypt, and that was actually the first mission that my whole my guys were fully green lighted to go to, because the one in Gaza, we were about to get spun up, but then they called it off because they're like, well, the school where the instructors teach the search and rescue, they decided to fight for that mission and say, no, 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 we have more experience. You know, it's a first platoon, whatever. So they actually sidelined us and they went and did that mission. But then we got the first mission, which was the Egypt hotel. That whole side of it had gone blown up by what do you call it? An a vehicle borne IED, or however it's called. So basically an explosive vehicle that rammed into the side of the building, blew up, and the whole side of the building just evaporated.
Why
And
why was the IDF going into Egypt for an attack on Egypt?
I think because there were Israelis in the hotel, and so Israel basically fought to send our search and rescue to take part of that. And I think also because we wanted to make sure that we could account for all the Israelis that had been murdered in that terror attack. So that was part of it. And so yeah, so they got sent over there, but the decision was that there's not going to be any IDF clothing, so nothing that says IDF on it. So we had to go in civilian clothing, essentially, so to speak, to go and perform that first real life search and rescue mission. And that that mission affected a lot of the kids quite deeply because, for anybody who's ever been in a scenario like that where people have been blown to bits or charred alive, it's pretty nasty imagery and smells and so on and so forth, that are really gonna mar your soul. And so that was our first, again, baptism in fire for these young kids. That this was their first search and rescue mission. And at that time, I don't think we got anybody alive out of the wreckages, only bodies and casualties.
So it sounds a lot like Zaka.
A
Where you
little bit. Yeah, no, it's not at all.
Yeah.
But because so imagine like this, the missions that these guys do is we had very powerful what do you call it? Like if you have a huge, massive slab of cement wall on top of you, we could
Oh,
wedge a piece in there and then cause it to expand and lift that massive piece off of you. And so it's like combat engineers in a way, in a wreckage. And then we had like the jaws of life that could cut through massive pieces of metal, rebar, and also use that to actually lift and open up a gap, and to get into areas. We had these special saws you could cut through cement with, all kinds of specialty tools, including tools to open up doors and doorways that had massive frames on them. So we had this special hydraulic system that was so like for example, you see in any of the war footage, you'll see them put a charge on door and they'll blow the door in or out. What we did is we actually would just destroy the frame of the door with this special system, and the door would just, you know, open easily. And so a lot of our missions was actually joining special forces units in Jenin and other places that we would have to help. That we were the entry team that would help them break through that barrier and so basically they didn't have to have one of their operators carry this big heavy machine. We were the we were the entry team that helped do that, and then they went ahead and took care of business. So that was part of the kind of missions that these guys did. And then the long story short is I ended up right after that into the Northern Command, and that's where I finished my service, and then ended up doing my reserve duty up until 2014 up there. So from 2006 to 2014. So as far as wars, I was basically in every war from 2003 to present. I think there was maybe a few small conflicts that I missed out on because of they didn't call us up or whatever.
Got it. And in a lot of different roles, it sounds like
Yeah,
everything to search and rescue, to command, to
yeah,
and then eventually into special forces.
yeah, yeah. So Northern Command, that was it was equivalent to what I started with in Givati. It was a reserve unit for Golani, mainly Golani, where they pulled guys from the Golani battalions.
Mhm.
And so essentially, I ended up fighting with a bunch of guys that were our counters in the combat teams and whatever. Um, Basically, it was like, who cares what background you are? We're all combat soldiers, and we're all here to fight the enemy. So we put all that stupid stuff aside and just, and plus being reservists is like, seriously, we don't care, you know, like big deal. What flag you wear, what symbols you have. It's like, just give
But
me a gun and point me in the right direction and we'll get her done.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So specifically, so you've seen, I mean, it sounds like you've seen it all. I mean, the landscape has changed so much. I mean, it's
Yeah.
so not funny is not the word, but listening from 2025 to think
Yeah.
of some sort of rudimentary tunnel, I'm imagining like a guy with a pick, and now, obviously what they've created is bigger than the London Underground,
Yeah.
and which really hurts my heart when you say that the IDF's original reaction was, well, there's nothing we could do, because quite frankly, I have been sounding the bell so as loudly as little, Shana in LA can do, as soon as, the squad made it to Congress and everybody's like, there's only three of them. I'm like, that's not the point. Everything is going to start with three. And we
Mhm.
need to change this now. And we see how this far left liberal, um, you know, its moral rot has taken over the world, and people tend
Yeah.
to sort of push aside the warning signs. And I've always wondered the same about Hezbollah. I mean, how were they able to amass almost $200,000, 200,000 missiles right under the nose of the United Nations, of Israel, of America? Everyone knew what was going on. And at what point do you say, oh yeah, we actually can do something? And that point was after 180,000, rockets, missiles, etc., were amassed. And at that point, obviously we had a masterful execution of that aspect of the war, but it didn't have to get to that point.
Correct.
So I want to talk specifically about the IDF, because there's a moral code that it right now, there's no doubt that like the state of urban warfare against Israel has become like literally like a cesspool of terror and tyranny. And in stark contrast to the relentless stream of war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated by Israel's enemies, by radical Islam. The IDF's very foundation is the spirit of the IDF, Ruach Tzahal, the moral code, or the so-called 10 Commandments of the Israeli military, which is based on Jewish principles and values. So, Doron, could you talk to us about what is contained in this doctrine and how central is it to actual IDF combat?
Yeah, first of all, it's a very good question because I think that's the question that people need to be asking themselves when confronting this idea that we're so-called committing genocide in Gaza. I mean, there's lots of footage that comes out from Gaza, and let me just point out that anything, and I mean anything that comes out of Gaza, if it's not from other foreign press, it's going that have been brought in with IDF convoys, which we were had done some of those missions ourselves, my team. So I know that we have let in the press into the battle space to let them see how we're fighting and what we're doing. But other than those entities that are outside of Gaza, they're not the ones that are spreading most of the misinformation that's literally coming from out of Gaza, which is terrorist propaganda. It's so-called journalists. These are terrorists that Israel has documented, Israel has exposed to the world, and the world just ignores it like it's no big deal, because, oh, you're killing babies and children and women and whatever, so you don't have a right to have the moral high ground. And I'm like, that's nice of you to say that as you're sitting there sipping your overpriced latte, enjoying your free internet. It's not free because you paid for the overpriced latte. Um, but it's like folks that live in a world that is so clean and free of conflict, it's very convenient for you to judge me. You're not in my shoes. You don't have to face those demons. And I'm not talking about metaphorical demons. I'm talking about real demons. Hamas are demons. There's no other word for these guys. They're demonic. They're sick, perverted sociopaths. And they will do anything, and I mean anything, to destroy Israel. If that be propaganda, misinformation, demonizing Israel, killing their own people, because the head count of Palestinians, as far as they're concerned, only strengthens their claim against Israel. And so one of the big claims is that X and X amount of civilians were killed in this conflict. And you keep hearing these numbers and they keep exploding and becoming way more extreme and way more and way more. And again, who's providing the numbers? Again, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and all these terrorist groups. So the information you're getting, the footage you're getting, the data you're getting coming out of Gaza is from the terrorists. So let's just start there. If you're going to accuse me of being immoral, being wrong, being animals, you're crazy for thinking that, and or you're very duped and have fallen for literally their plan, which was to deceive you and to make you think that about me. So what's my moral code when I'm facing this? When I'm facing an enemy, like I said, will stop at nothing to either destroy me physically and or image-wise in the world's view. The IDF has, like you said, the 10 commandments of the moral code of conduct for every soldier in the military. And that means everyone. It's not just combat soldiers, anyone who serves. We all get this little pamphlet, and it's a nice little laminated fold out. I still have mine from my recruitment, by the way. And what it's called is Ruach Tzal. It's the spirit of the IDF. And interestingly enough, it's called the spirit of the IDF, right? Because it's not the rules of the IDF or the laws of the IDF. It's the spirit. Because baked into these 10 principles of conduct is how we treat our other, the enemy. Um, we treat them with respect. We do not use our weapon as a means to get what I want. In other words, put a weapon in the enemy's face and say, "Hey, go get me this and that." I'm entering their home. Go do this, go do that, and I'm threatening them with my weapon. It's like, no, if you're not a threat to me, the weapon right that I'm holding right now, that is not used to exercise my will against you. It's to literally eliminate a threat when that threat is showing itself to be a viable threat to my life, either to myself or to those around us. That's the only reason that I will bring my weapon up and I will point it in the direction of that threat and eliminate it. So that's a huge difference for people to understand that if a military who has just that one principle alone that I'm pointing out of those 10, what makes you think that I'm just going to start pointing my weapon indiscriminately and just start shooting and killing little kids and women? First of all, and this is another thing, is like for anybody who's ever been in conflict, which most of the people listening right now have not. You've not been in armed conflict and probably have not been in a fist fight. And you know what? Why don't you go get in one? Because until you get punched in the face, until you feel your life being threatened even a little bit, you're not even going to understand the context of what I'm trying to talk about. To kill an innocent person is going to mar your soul for eternity. Nobody, and I mean nobody, unless you're a psychopath like Hamas, is going to want to do that. Why on earth would normal civilians like myself, who have children, who have a wife, why would I want to go hurt innocent people from Gaza? Now, put aside the fact that there are no innocents in Gaza. So I will counter with that as well, right? I know for a fact that every person that I've encountered in Gaza is dirty one way or other. Either they're combatants and or they're supporting staff, right? So they're transporting cell phones, anything as simple as just transferring, like, well, what's the big deal? The big deal is that cell phone is that communication line between terrorist A and terrorist B, and terrorist A telling terrorist B, hey, this is where I just saw IDF troops moving towards. Get your RPG ready. This is where I saw the guys going in. This is what wall they're up against. And that's how you can hit them and hurt them. And that's exactly what we encountered in Gaza, nonstop. I did not see one child and not one, well, I won't say I didn't see females or women. We did see women, but it was rare. Most of what we encountered were fighting age males, some a little bit older, but the majority were fighting age males. Almost all of them, like I said, were either terrorists or terrorist supporters. And you can't differentiate between the two because they're all dressed in civilian clothing. Not one of them, not one of the terrorists I encountered in Gaza was wearing the Hamas outfit and or headbands, ironically.
They
Why is that?
magically found them for the big showcases of them releasing the with all their kindness and in showmanship way, getting back to the concept of the yellow journalism, the fact that there's no objective journalism in Gaza. Like, who do they think is orchestrating these horrifying terror releases? It's Al Jazeera. It's the media that is literally feeding Hamas propaganda to the world, and the
Yeah.
world is consuming it like pigs at a trough.
You know what they won't show you? They won't show you this. Where do you think I found this?
It's funny. I can't see it because the picture's too small, but
There.
oh,
And again, the image is going to be not very sharp because this is an auto correct or whatever.
I'm going to
But in any
say
case,
finish school.
for your viewers, this was found in a home. Okay. This right here is a Hamas mug that I found in a home, or we found, my unit, one of the homes that we entered, and there was dozens of those gift wrapped in, the clear plastic with a nice little bow. Tens of those, tens of those. Okay. I think there was at least 20, give or take. And I took I took one of those home with me to have, not because I'm trying to, because people say, oh, look at, another war crime. He stole property from the terrorists. Listen, that home was blown to bits and everything in it was going to be blown to bits shortly thereafter. So I took this not to loot the enemy. It was to show and tell because I knew that if I did not bring you hard evidence, like they're saying, show me the baby heads, show me the 40 baby heads. Are you people sick? Are you out of your minds? First of all, let me point out that most of y'all wouldn't be able to stomach the crap that I've had to see. You would throw up, your soul would be marred. You don't want to see that. Let's start with that. For all of these, again, keyboard heroes, show me, show me, show me the proof. Second of all, if you weren't fast enough on October 7th to watch all the live feeds of the murdering and the killing spree that took place, and the internet was flooded with all that stuff, well, too bad for you.
Shot by Hamas themselves. I mean, this is the irony that people
Well,
trying.
shot by them on their own devices, but also shot on the devices of the people they murdered and killed because they wanted to live stream it off of their device so that their friends and family would see it. So again, I mean, I don't owe you proof. First of all, let's start with that. I don't owe you anything. Whoever the you are out there in the internet world, all of you who are hating on me and my friends, those of you who came to my speaking engagements in the States and screamed, what about the children? What about the children? Which children? Which children? Oh, you mean the Arab children in Gaza? What about the Bibas children? Isn't that interesting? I don't see one of those protesters that interrupted my speaking engagement, okay, screaming all passionate about the children, holding those nasty Palestinian flags, which, by the way, anybody who holds up a Palestinian flag, you're holding up the flag of a terrorist state. You might as well be holding up an ISIS flag and call it a day because they are one and the same. Ask me how I know, because guess what else we found with the terrorists? What flags they're flying? The Palestinian flag and the Hamas flag and the Islamic Brotherhood flag, etc., etc. So yeah, go ahead and wave those flags and scream free Palestine from the river to the sea, because what you guys are doing in your ignorance is you're literally supporting bloodthirsty, demonic terrorists.
Right.
I can't put it any more plainer and more simple than that. And you saw that mug? That's just one of a long list of crap that we ran into. And children's home, in children's bedroom, okay? So a girl's bedroom, Mickey Mouse, pink walls, the whole, and then a terror tunnel pier leading into the terror tunnels right next to her bed.
Sure. And this
Okay?
is all over the internet. Anybody could find this. This is not.
If you want to.
Yeah.
If you want to. Yeah.
I
Instead, they find pictures of poor so-called Palestinian babies and all that. Half of that is staged. The other half of that is from world atrocities and earthquakes that have happened around the world and in Arab countries where they have the same dress. So it's easy for you as a Westerner to be fooled. I can tell the difference because I know exactly how they dress here versus how they dress in other parts of the country. I mean, other parts of the world. In other words, if I see that it's not something that I've seen them wearing here, I'm going, oh, that's probably from somewhere else because I've never seen that style or the way they wear the hijab, etc. But again, Westerners are so quick to jump on their high horse and preach morality to me and to my men and women who have laid down our lives to defend our families. That is what we're doing. And we're doing it with the highest moral code of conduct that any military in the world has. And how do I know that? Because I've spoken to other militaries in the world. Okay? We don't live in a bubble here in the IDF. We have counterparts from Europe. We have counterparts from the United States, Canada, Australia, all over the world. And I have met warfighters who have had to do the bloodiest, nastiest fighting for their countries from all over the world, from Europe, America, Australia, Canada. They all tell me the same thing. You guys are crazy. We would never take the risk that you guys take in order to defeat the enemy. Never.
in
And
order
the irony is,
to protect
sorry.
me. in order to protect the enemy.
Yeah, to protect it. Well,
Yeah.
because again, to us, even though I know there are no innocents in Gaza, I know that there's a difference between somebody who is taking up arms to try to kill me, right? And somebody who has been brainwashed to believe that they have to support the one who is taking those arms and they're supporting them. So, yes, you could look at them and say, well, they're terrorists as well, but I see them as victims of the terrorists.
Sure.
I see them as victims of a society that is bathed in brainwashing, and that's what they are. They're like brainwashed zombies, and so I actually have compassion for those people. And my hope is that they get out of Gaza, which again, talking about, let's say, Trump's plan, the best thing in the world is for them to get out of that hellhole, because that's what Hamas has created, is a hellhole. There's nothing there for them. Nothing. What they need to do is get detached, uprooted, and separated from terrorists as far as possible, and just get on with their lives,
Yeah.
and hopefully learn math and arts and architecture and how to create and how to build and how to love. These people don't know how to love. I'm telling you, we have seen so many of them. They just have pure hatred in them and fear, because they think that when we capture them, that we're going to commit the same atrocities that they do to our captives. And so actually at first they're terrified. They pee themselves, they poop themselves, and all that nasty stuff. And we're just like, bro, take it easy, take a deep breath. Here's some water. Okay. I have a picture of one of my friends that I took of him literally giving water to one of these terrorists that we ended up having to watch over for a short period. It wasn't our main mission. But again, when you have an all-out war, you're doing all kinds of missions that are not your objectives. One of them being that we ended up supervising some terrorists. And let me tell you, I didn't want to come near those guys because I had so much hatred towards them.
Yeah.
And I'm just being very real.
Yeah.
I mean, I had so much hatred towards them because of what I knew that possibly they had committed towards one of the Israelis. I didn't want to come near them, that God forbid I lose it. And here, one of my good friends who actually fought these terrorists on October 7th, physically fought through a wave of these terrorists, okay, had good friends of his get killed in the gun battles. And he's the one that was able to overcome that. I want to tear this guy to pieces, to, you know what? He's hot. He's miserable. It's a hot day. They probably haven't, because we didn't know what the process was before they got to us. Had they eaten? Had they drunk? Anything? So he literally took from our supplies and went and gave water to these terrorists. And I was like, man. And I took a picture of it because I was like, that right there is something you're not going to see in the media. The world is never going to show that compassion, that ability to overcome, like I said, that pure rage that we had to experience and go through towards our enemy. These are things that none of these keyboard warriors will ever experience, ever understand, ever have to overcome, ever in their life. I hope not. But you know what? One day, the way you alluded to, the way Islamists are planning, there's an Islamic tsunami that it is not going to take over the West. It is trying to take over the West actively as we speak.
Absolutely.
And what are you going to do when they start committing those atrocities against you? Are you going to whine about how bad the United States is acting in response to these terrorists, and or Canada, and or Australia, and or wherever you're coming from? I doubt you're going to be bitching about it then. Forgive my French.
Right.
No, you're not going to say a word. You're going to be that loud Karen, so to speak, and get up there and go, why is anybody defending me? Why is the police not helping me? I bet you anything that's what they're going to do.
Well, it already happened in 9/11, but honestly, people don't understand that everything that you've said, every word that you've said is just based in one thing, and that's double standards. And people have to understand that double standards are anti-Semitic. To that end,
Yep.
I want to say that I put a link to the Spirit of the IDF in the show notes.
Great.
I do want to mention something that I mean, obviously, but John Spencer has been on my show. Andrew Fox has been on my show twice, right? So John Spencer being the head of urban warfare studies at West Point, Andrew Fox being his counterpart at Sandhurst in England. We've got Colonel Richard Kemp. We've got all these people who have zero skin in the game, who have all attested to the fact that the IDF takes greater pains by far, including giving away their actual game plan to the enemy in order to mitigate civilian casualties. And people cannot seem to understand this. When it comes to Israel, I think that the general global populace has so much trouble. Again, it's just another double standard, but reconciling the concept of morality with military might. I mean, even after the West experienced the horror of 9/11, and rightfully supported, as you were talking about, the war on terror that followed, wherein, by the way, there were 440,000 civilian casualties. I've never heard a single person protest. I can see people now hypocritically rolling their eyes and saying, oh, right, Jewish values. The only Jewish military value is genocide, which is their favorite word, which means nothing. So you talked about this, but because you are on the front lines of this information war, I'm curious, and it's a question that everybody is struggling with, but perhaps you have some insight. How do you overcome this ignorant objection in a way that helps people to understand the actual concept of fighting a just and existential war for the sake of peace and security? It's not a difficult concept, and yet it's been completely lost in the mix.
Yeah. Well, I think we can start with something that most people want to deny in Western civilization, where they have gone to intellectia, however you say the word, basically relying on the knowledge of man, right? Humanism, right? Humanism, man is wiser than God. There is no God. We're all gods, and so on. And then the famous line from from 13 Hours is I think that guy Boone is his name, or I forget which, but one of the characters there makes that quote about all the gods and so on that are within us. I don't believe in that. I don't believe that we are. I don't. I'm so far from believing that. I believe that we are created by God. I believe that we're created beings. I believe that God is giving us free reign to either submit to who he is and to his authority and to his greatness over us. And by doing so, you're submitting yourself to a higher power, and therefore you recognize in yourself you are powerless even to think right thoughts, true thoughts. And that is why I think there's no way for me to combat this kind of evil thinking in humanity except God.
Mm-hmm.
Plain and simple. This is a spiritual war that we're fighting. It's a spiritual war. And people don't like to talk about it because they want to talk in humanistic terms. They want to use fancy words. Look at all the books behind me, okay? Trust me, I can act educated if I wanted to. I can act like I'm smarter than you if I wanted to. That doesn't give me any value as a human being. If I'm smarter than you or more educated than you, that doesn't make me better than you. What makes me better than the other person is my ability to humble myself as a human being and recognize in myself, within myself, I am rot. I am miserable, evil human being that needs saving from a higher power, from God, to save me from the evil inclination, or to save you from the devil, however you want to label it and name it and term it. The point is, there is a pure evil in this world. These are spiritual forces, and you can give yourself over to that, or you can give over yourself to the light of God. And to me, the only way that I can get the right thought and the right mindset and to detach and fight against that darkness is through God's word. And so my power, my superpower is that I read God's word and that I pray the Jewish prayers that are so powerful because they're God's word. A lot of people don't recognize that, but when you look at a Siddur, the Jewish prayer book, it's like 90+% scripture and some rabbinic additions and rewording of a word or whatever, or a phrase, but it's all Bible based from
Right.
God's word. So the Jewish people, and I think that's our superpower and has been, that's kept us throughout generations and kept us sane, kept us uh, um, from losing our minds, like France, like England, like Germany, like now we're seeing in America and Australia, nations that used to be Christian, that used to be founded on biblical values, are now turning to humanism. They're turning towards their own intellectia. Like they're trying to be smart and like, science and this and that. And the more you study science, the more you delve into the universe, the more you discover, and this is what I've heard from all mainstream scientists, not the anti-God scientists who are trying to bury the data, but actual scientists who are just giving you pure fact and data. They're all saying there has to be a higher power that has created everything. In other words, we are created beings. And this universe isn't just a bang that happened out of nothing and bang, there we are, living creatures with brains, with eyes, with ears, with intellect, with, I mean, it's
But
like,
like,
hello?
here's the thing, Doron. Even if it were just a big bang out of nowhere, first of all, the mind cannot even conceive of the concept of actual nothing. There has
Right, right.
nor can it conceive of infinity. So
That too.
the fact that at one point there was nothing, now there is infinity. Both concepts that the mind can't. There's just no way to really wrap our minds around us. But even if the Big Bang
Correct.
came out of nowhere, something came from nothing.
Exactly.
Can't be so that proves that there's a power way higher than humanity, and it's so funny to me when people are like, oh well, we created all this. I'm like, you created the stars, you created the planets, you created the other systems like beyond our universe. It's such a bizarre, but we live in this godless world, and I do want to get into religion, but first
Yeah.
take a step back into something way more simplistic, because
Yeah.
oddly enough, I heard you use the same analogy that I have used over and over again, which is the very, very simple concept of Star Wars. To
Okay.
this picture of the battle between good and evil. It's a picture that could just as easily be like drawn in stick figures, and a 5-year-old would understand it. In war,
Right.
there are two sides, right? There's the good guys and the bad guys. You root
Yeah.
for the good guys, no matter how many bad guys are killed in the process. And in fact,
Hmm.
the more the better, right? Like no one cried when a whole battalion of stormtroopers was wiped out in an instant. But
Right.
I'll tell you something interesting about, but right, like the same people who are cheering for,
Except for if you notice the more modern renditions of the Star Wars series, they now humanize,
like, and
right? They humanize the stormtroopers and go, "Oh, look,
that's
it's he has feelings and emotions and and really, oh, and has moved over to the good side, and it's just like
it,
that is Hollywood trying to water down the basics of humanity, which is what you just said. There is pure evil and
yeah,
there's pure good, and that works great in storytelling, in trying to communicate age-old conflicts and whatever between good and evil. And when you start to try to humanize, and you see this like with the latest Jokers and the latest all these villains, they're not trying to humanize them and like as if like a shrink is trying to explain how come is it this person just they didn't just decide one day to just get up and start murdering people for no good reason. I'm like, wait, have you never heard of such a thing as a serial killer? Like
right.
I've studied serial killers uh back in the day when I was doing a lot of research for crime and whatever in part of my studies, and I got into like a black hole of studying all these guys and trying to understand them. And what I discovered was real simple. They have no empathy. They have no regret, no feeling whatsoever towards the taking of a life. It's pure evil, plain and simple. Now, to try to take a person like this and try to humanize them,
Right.
that to me is sick and is wrong. And that's the way society is. But sorry for cutting you off on that. It just, to me, it's like you need to pay attention to what Hollywood's doing. Hollywood is purposely trying to propagandize you, the viewer, and you need to be aware of that because you're going to be duped into thinking that, oh, if I just sit down with Giuliani, that used to be an ISIS terrorist here, and now he's the new ruler of Syria, and look, he's in his nice pearl palace in a nice suit, and and he's such a sweet guy. Bro, the guy's ISIS scumbag, and I wish him the deepest pits of hell that he and his cronies will burn there for rest of eternity, full stop. If you want to CNN and BBC make him out into some kind of saint or into some kind of moderate that overnight
Right.
turned from butchering and murdering people, and you don't even want to know because I'm not going to say it because you don't want to have those images in your head. You don't even want to know what these people do to their
Right.
enemies. And again, that it's the West that is trying to beautify and explain the villain and how that maybe they can change. No, they don't.
Well,
They're evil and they're pure evil and they're not going to change.
it's funny that you're saying you're sorry for interrupting because it was actually the point I was just about to make. The same is this. I was going to go on with the Star Wars thing, but also we saw this glorification of evil with this a couple during the pandemic. I think that the Osama bin Laden doctrine that was going around as like, oh, look how cool this dude was, right? Like he was just a guy who wanted, good things for the world. But it's interesting when you say turning the good guys into the bad guys, because I actually see it differently. Because
Yeah.
so on this I agree with what you're saying with the humanization, but they're still the bad guys. That's the problem. But around like it was around 2005. I know it's gonna sound funny, but I ordered like this pack of Star Wars socks. Don't judge me. And there were like Luke socks, Leia socks, Yoda socks, Obi-Wan socks, and then there was this one pair that was Darth Vader. And it literally said on it, I love the dark side. These are socks
Oh,
that were probably meant for kids, but I was buying them as an adult.
yeah.
Um, and I have to say, like, when I saw this pair, like, I was utterly confounded by this inclusion. But it was also the moment that like I woke him and realized that like I think what's really unfolding is not just the humanization, but this cult of darkness where people
I will show you some more
yeah,
show and tell in a second talking about this. Continue. This is great.
that's okay. The cult of darkness. And yeah,
Well, what you're saying, the messaging there was trying to popularize being evil, being the naughty one, like no big deal, right? Because you have the dark side, you have the good side, and some will fall over here. So no big deal. Oh, it's a big deal. It's a very big deal. And again, if you understand God, the kingdom of God, him trying to draw to his kingdom those that are of the light and to reject those who do not belong in that kingdom. Well, if you don't understand those basic principles of God, then and you just think, oh, it's all relative, it doesn't matter, then I feel very sorry for you because, again, in my opinion, from my faith base where I come from, and again, people will mock this. They'll think they're going to oversimplify and say, "Oh, you're just a Bible thumper or whatever." Knock yourself out. Make fun of me. Whatever. I really don't care because at the end of the day, what makes me who I am and what makes me bold in who I am is knowing who I am in God, who I am through reading His Word that says who I am. I love the Psalms of David. I love just the rawness, the humility, the ability to put yourself aside and to magnify God. It's not about me. It's not about how, glorifying myself, like King David, right? He was, when he had taken over the Jebusite city of Jerusalem, he could have built a fancy palace. He could have built a wonderful kingdom all throughout the Israelite kingdom that he was building and so on, which he did. He had all these fortifications and all these amazing things. And again, in archaeology today, they're trying to argue and say, no, he was just a Bedouin nomad. It wasn't from time of King David. Turns out that actually it was from the time of King David. What it was is the reason why David was great was because it said that he sought out a place for God. In Psalm, I think 132, it says that David did not give himself slumber or sleep until he found a place for God. In other words, that was his number one priority. It wasn't that he builds his palace. He literally lost sleep over, where do I magnify God? And to me, that's what it all boils down to. And if you want to magnify self, you're going to belittle yourself in either in this world or in the world to come. Any which way, you'll get your reward in this world because you grab and take whatever you think is yours and you want, knock yourself out. I'd rather invest in the future, talking about investment, and just knowing that one day, yes, evil people will come, they will steal, they will take, the whatever, but there's going to be a reckoning of all of us. And I want to be one of those who's not going to be held guilty for stealing or taking or promoting myself in a business over someone else and all that kind of stuff. It's a different attitude when you have, to me, when you're God-minded versus self-minded. But in any case, so talk about propaganda. You were making me think about that. Let me see if I can get that correctly. So
Yep.
this book right here, okay, it says, "We are Palestinians, a celebration of culture and tradition." That's laughable. So there's no Palestinian culture, there's no Palestinian tradition,
There's no Palestinian state. People don't understand. You
no Palestinian state.
without
Yeah,
borders or a government.
yeah, yeah.
Like the confusion that has taken over the world is overwhelming. But I digress. Go on.
Yes. So my recommendation is you go to my website, doronkeidar.com, and look at the book that I'm promoting called The Truth About Palestine. It's a wonderful book. I'm going to preface. It's written by a Christian apologetic. Okay, so this person is writing from Christian views. He's going to be talking about a lot of Christian doctrine and ideas. But the first two chapters, I think it's the first two chapters, he delves into the history of Palestine, where did it come from, where did this myth was created, and why is it that we're fighting this today in modern society? And part of how they're doing it is through what you see here. It seems to be just some harmless book. I mean, look, there's picture book. There's nothing. Well, this one's a little bit more. Might be terrifying for some people, but it's mostly just really,
Yeah.
sweet pictures.
Right.
It's just giving you like a, oh, isn't this nice? The food, the this, the that. Oh, the film culture. Yeah, I'll tell you all about that.
Yeah, it's thriving.
And so this right here, I found this in the States. Okay. So good friends of mine in Florida, they found this in the public library. This is what is being taught to your kids in picture book form. And that is why I am now engaging people online who are brainwashed zombies and see me as this person who stole these good people's, the we are the Palestinian people's traditions and culture, taken over by Western European Jews who are colonialists, which couldn't be farther from the truth. Over 60% of Israeli society is Middle Eastern. They are Arabs, okay? Even though the Palestinians are forgetting that they are Arabs, it's the Jews who come from Arab lands who knows that they once upon a time were also Arabs from Iraq, Syria, Egypt, Yemen, and the list goes on. That is over 60% of the Jews in the modern state of Israel. And those are the ones I grew up with, right? That's my culture. And so I can tell you that this idea that we white colonialists, again, I fit the perfect narrative that people are saying, right? Because of my accent and the way I look and etc. But the irony is, I get all these talkbacks on the internet that say, "Oh, how does this American soldier fight in an Israeli conflict?" and blah blah. I was born and raised in Israel. Okay, just because I sound like an American and I happen to have American heritage does not mean that that is my culture. So what? So a white South African who grew up in South Africa, they're not African?
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are concepts that people just they don't think about because you live in what? Podunk, Iowa or Tennessee, and you've never left town and you've never seen the world. You don't know what Asians look like. You don't know what Russians look like or East Europeans versus Europeans from like Prague and so on, and how they speak more than one language. I know that's a hard thing to wrap your brain around, etc. But that is most of the world is like that. Most of the world speaks more than one language. Most of the world understands that the cultures around us are a lot more diversified than the simple, oh, because your skin's white, because they speak English, they must be colonialists. That's your narrative. That's what you grew up with. Quit projecting your narrative, your worldviews onto mine. I'm from the Middle East. I am Middle Eastern. So is most of the people who live in this country. In fact, all the people that live here, on the exception of those who did immigrate presently and recently from either Europe or from Africa. Okay. But point being is people have such a weird view about Israel and they forget we have Christian Arab Jews, we have Muslim Arab Jews, we have Christian Arabs, we have Muslim Arabs, we have Druze, we have Cherkessians, we have Bedouins. We have so many minorities, so many that live in this country that make up the population of Israel. It's not just white colonialist Jews as people view. And the reason why you think that is because you probably read one of these propaganda books or you saw some kind of documentary online and you think now you're an expert on the matter. You're not an expert if you didn't spend at least 10 years, according to Musab Hassan Yusuf. I'm going to use his quote, the Green Prince, or Son of Hamas, however you've heard him online. He made a beautiful point. He said, unless you have lived 10 years in that culture, you don't have a right to judge that culture. I agree with him 100%. It takes years to understand the culture, the place you live in, etc. I lived 5 years in Sweden. That doesn't make me an expert on Sweden, okay? Although I know a whole lot more about Sweden than most Swedes, ironically, because I actually took more interest in learning the history, the culture, whatever, as an immigrant, right? But again, that doesn't mean I know what it means to be Swedish. I'm not going to patronize them about, oh, well, you're this and you're that. How would I know? I didn't grow up there.
Well, we live in a post-factual world. So, I mean, I think that one of the most ludicrous things I saw was some grad student here at UCLA who literally just started studying the conflict since 10/7, who actually took it upon himself to debate Mossab, which is unbelievable. You're talking about a guy with zero contact, zero understanding of history, debating as if he's some sort of expert, the actual son of one of the leaders of Hamas, and claiming that he knows more. The hubris is unconscionable, but so we have two problems right now. Okay, so we live in a post-factual world, yeah. But like you, I agree that the other big, huge problem is we live, honestly, in a largely post-religious world. And this is playing a huge role in like the current state of moral rot and confusion. I mean, even in the yoga world, right? So we have this concept of Ishvara Pranidhana, which literally means submission to a higher power. And the good news is you get to pick the power. So it doesn't matter if it's the Jewish God, if it's Christ, if it's Allah, if it's, name the guy, you just submit to something higher. And yet, as foundational as that is to the practice, a large percentage of the people I know in the yoga community consider themselves to be either atheist or agnostic. Now, this is a real problem. These are the people whose lives are supposed to be centered on God. And
Right.
Western morality, I don't what's her name? Phillips. Oh my goodness.
Melanie Phillips.
Yeah, her new book is unbelievable. But really the whole concept is that Western civilization is civilization. And the Western morality is a function of Judeo-Christian values. Now,
Yeah.
these are values that have largely dissipated in modern society. Like even I don't live in Israel. I've never lived in Israel, but I've been there about 25, 30 times. I go a lot. But even much of Israel has been become so very, very secular, to be honest, over the years. And what's interesting to me, however, is that rather than Israelis losing their faith in God after October 7th, exactly the opposite happened. And it largely happened throughout the diaspora as well, that Israelis and the Jewish people have returned to faith. And we even hear remarkable stories of hostages doing the same, both in and after captivity. So I don't have this is not a loaded question, but did the horrors of 10/7 affect your faith in any way? And when I ask this question, everyone thinks I mean, did it make you lose faith? I don't mean that.
Right.
Did it affect your faith?
Yeah. Of course, it affected my faith. There's no way that something like that wouldn't. Um, I would say for the first time in my personal life, after studying the Holocaust and being very interested in World War II because of my father's involvement and that kind of thing, and always trying to understand how is it, A, that people did the evils that they did, the Nazis, and then B, how come is it there were so many Jews who lost faith and turned on God in a very raw way. And while some did the very opposite, right? So like Rabbi Lau, as a one of my heroes, that basically miraculously survived the Holocaust, made Aliyah, and grew up in stature in as a rabbi and so on to the point where he became the chief rabbi of Israel at one point. And you look at that guy and you also hear the wisdom that comes from him and hear him talk about his experience and his faith in God and how the Holocaust basically shaped his faith, right? And that's something that's always inspired me. But I always thought, okay, but then there are those who literally had the very opposite takeaway from the Holocaust, right? And I always wondered, like, okay, so you came near death, and I mean near horrible, nasty death, not just oh, we were in a car crash and we almost died. It's like no, like literally either a Nazi pointed a gun at you or you were sent to the death camps, and then last minute somebody pulled you out of a line, took you, to the other whatever, and the circumstances changed and literally flipped. And so that always made me wonder, like, after experiencing something like that, and then also, again, just turning away from God or being bitter towards God, trying to understand that, right? And I think for the first time, I can say that, and I say, unfortunately, this is a horrible thing to even experience, is to be able to say that we've experienced a level of that kind of questioning of one's faith, right? Through atrocity, through pure horrible evil that was executed towards my people. And to be able to walk out of that with a strengthening in my faith, with a not wavering, not questioning God and being bitter at God. Although I would say there are dilemmas that are different, so to speak, right? There are things that you're working out in your soul, in your being, as somebody who's gone through that, that it's something I can't really put into words. I can't really express the spiritual battle, so to speak, going within me, right? Within my mind, my soul, my spirit. Um, but I wouldn't say that going through that has diminished my faith. It's definitely strengthened my faith, especially seeing real life miracles repeatedly for my team and other fellow soldiers on the battlefield. And I give examples on that on my talk in the States, for example. I talked about the miracles of the one police officer who was able to save 500 souls that would have perished had he not been brave. And the reason why I like to use his example is because he's not a SWAT guy. He's not a tactical guy. He's literally a simple beat cop that was willing to just run into the fire, to step out there and repeatedly go get more people and more people and more people until he was wounded and couldn't do it anymore. And so laying there in the bed, in the hospital bed, his words while interviewed of, is there anything you want to tell us? Whatever. He says, I wish I could save more, as he's in tears. I wish I could save more. And I'm like, dude, you saved 500 people. Like, that's insane. That's a miracle. Good friend of mine, Chaim, he's a big, tall, Middle Eastern guy. Um, he he and his number two were the only two guys defending whole areas of communities, of southern communities that would have been slaughtered by terrorists had they not stood their ground. So they saw a motorcade of motorbikes coming from, like, on two sides of the road coming towards them in two rows. And then at the very back, they saw those Toyota trucks, Helixes, heading towards them. At first, they thought, oh, great, here comes the cavalry, because they kept calling neighboring communities. They said, what's going on? We hear that there's terrorists, something bad's happening. And they heard this one was killed, that one was killed. All these defenders were being taken out. And they're like, crap. So no reinforcements. Not just that, the neighboring communities are getting attacked just as hard as anywhere else. And apparently we're next, right? So they realize no one else is coming. You're alone. What are you going to do? Do you get in your pickup truck, which, by the way, is bulletproof, and just drive away, knowing that if you get shot, the chances that you're going to survive is much higher than everybody else that's left behind you, right? Oh, and plus they got body armor and they got ballistic helmets. So even if any bullets did penetrate the bulletproof glass and armaments, you're still good to go, so to speak, right? Just get the heck out of there. Leave everybody. Forget it. Why, right? Why stand your ground? And these guys did the very opposite. They went against the fight or flight instinct, stood their ground. They looked at each other. They said, Shema Israel, and went for it and just started opening fire on the first group of guys when they figured out that these were terrorists. I think it was two or three of these terrorists had fallen dead, and the whole convoy turned around and hightailed and head the opposite direction. That whole community, and communities plural, were saved because of these guys' stand. Another kid got hit with a 50 cal bullet, okay, into his torso. Based on the laws of physics, he should have actually come apart. It should have split him in half, is what should have happened. That's how anybody who's ever been hit with a 50 cal, that's what happens. And basically, you're dead. This guy gets hit. He's intact. Today, he's a young kid. Today, he is walking, and he is coming to full recovery, but at least he's now walking without his walking sticks and all this a few months later. And this is one guy that I personally also got to meet on the battlefield, where me and my friend were able to medically evacuate him and his buddy who got wounded, but then they went back in for another volley of fighting, and that's when he got hit with the 50 cal, and then we visited him in the hospital as he survived that. So again, it's just there's a whole list of miracles that myself, my teammates, others had experienced. I cannot explain that away on the one hand. On the other hand, the negative guys, the naysayers are going to say, well, why them and not me? Or why them and not that person that got raped, murdered, tortured, killed, and what have you? You're right. And I don't have an answer for that. I don't have a fancy answer for you. All I know is God allows evil and good because that's what free will is. God didn't create a bunch of angels, right? Who are just, yes, sir, and do exactly as he says. He gave us the free will. And unfortunately, the drawback of that is what we see with the Nazis, what we see with the Chinese regime, what we see in Russia, what we see in with these terrorist Islamic jihadists. Every people group has had pure evil, different ideologies, whatever it may be, but just pure evil that exercises evil towards others. And it's up to good people and warriors to stand up against them. And I'll let God, handle the complexities of the why this, why them, why not me, and all that. I can't bother myself with not bother myself. Of course, I think about it, but there are things that if I don't have an answer for it, it's not that I'm not going to search for the answer. It's just there are things that are easier, or there are things that I can figure out. There are things I can do presently that I know, which is love God, love my neighbors, love my family, take care of my community. There are basic actions I can do and should focus on. And if I weigh too much on the negative and the horrors of life, in my opinion, you're going to become dysfunctional. You're going to become suicidal probably and fatalistic. And I prefer to be in the lane that I'm in, so to speak, versus in that fatalistic mindset, because I think that's very unhealthy for your soul and for your being. And but yes, there's not a simple answer this way or that way. There are
Yeah.
things that, you know, I'm human, okay? I'm not the creator. I don't know what's outside of the fishbowl, right? As a fish, all I know is that there's water and that I enjoy that water for oxygen, for warmth, or what have you, for food and all that. I can't tell you what's outside of that.
Yeah.
I don't have that knowledge, and it is what it is.
Faith, I think that quite honestly, if you take God out of the equation, um, Israel and the Jewish people would have been annihilated eons ago. I mean,
Yeah.
everything about our survival is a miracle. It's a miracle.
Yes.
The state of Israel is a living testament to God's promise. And in miracles, truly and honestly, are everywhere. But I think that our souls, like it's hard that sometimes the sight of the miracles can get lost in the reality of the terror that surrounds the state. I always think, not now, but normally, when I'm visiting Israel, it's like the eye of the storm. You could just be hanging out, doing Israeli dancing on Shabbat in Tel Aviv at the beach with, people playing volleyball and doing their things. And that, you know, couple miles away, there's terror and mayhem, and there's Syria killing themselves, and there's all the things, and it's this huge sea, 500 miles in any direction, and or more, what thousands of miles, and
Yeah.
there's a little dot in the middle of it that somehow has not just survived, but the story of the Jewish people. It's not one of victimization, though we have been victimized over and over through the ages. B, it's not even just of survival. The Jewish story is one of thriving, and thriving so far beyond anything that could rationally be explained, given the obstacles that have been thrown in our way. I want to ask you one more thing before we wrap up, because I think it's a very important aspect of this war that most people have lost sight of. Because as overwhelming in endless as this war is, and unfortunately it looks will continue to be, there's still like another layer of the fight beyond the information war, is this hidden war of the psychological trauma.
Mm.
And you're so strong. I know you said this is the first war that brought you to tears, which says a lot. But this is a war that psychological warfare, that tragically, like, Hamas has clearly won. They turn the screws at every single possible opportunity. I saw a very recent study in the last week or two. I have no track of time anymore, that estimated there are 3 million Israelis suffering from acute mental health issues since October 7th. So we're talking about like survivors of the massacres, military personnel, their families, hostages, their families, first responders, and quite frankly, the Israeli public at large has been terrorized. And I personally can attest to the fact that the devastating trauma by no means ends at Israel's borders. It's also overtaken and often debilitated both the Jews of the diaspora and our allies as well. So I know you have a lot of specific techniques that you've been doing. So can you share how you have personally experienced and dealt with this extraordinary trauma, stress, and pressure that has come from this war?
Yeah. Um, so what I do personally, as far as other than my spiritual routine, prayers and scripture and all that, um, I would say that one of the big benefits to my mental stability and working through just all of the PTS from the war and all the different traumas that each one of us experience differently and whatnot. Um, One of the things is just enjoying nature and trying to get out and either go on nature walks, connect with just enjoying God's beauty. It kind of resets you, so to speak, in your being. And actually, one of my teammates, talking about that, one of my teammates, or a few of my teammates, actually, they're working together, starting a new business venture that, or initiative, this new business initiative, where essentially they're going to do nature hikes and trails that are going to help people deal with their traumas and with their stress. And so they just started this. I've been promoting it on my social media, so you can just follow me and you'll see, and I'll keep sharing that. That is one one venue. I would say snorkeling, which I'm very looking forward to do at some point. I haven't had time because of the war and the little time I get at home and or in between traveling to. I went once to Norway and just recently came back from a month-long trip in the U.S. I haven't had time to actually decompress completely, but that's on my bucket list, is to go and go snorkeling, and that's usually been a something that has really kind of balanced me, so to speak. Just being able to be in the complete silence and just taking in the fish, the movement of the water, water therapy, I guess some might call it. Um, um, and then, of course, the negative ions that you get from just being at the sea and all that. Just nature, right? Nature has a way of healing us, has a way of recentering us, and I think that's just an important way to heal. And then another is in sports. So that has been actually the hardest thing for me because I've been injured during our activities and in the type of operations that we do. It just takes a very heavy toll on our physical bodies, and plus being post 40, it's like it feels like you're starting to hit the downhill on your recovery and all that kind of thing. So, uh, but physical fitness, if you can throw yourself into that, it's not if you can, you just have to accept that you're not on the same level that you were before the war, right? Before your injuries. At least for me, that was the mental hurdle to get over of I'm literally lifting these pathetic weights. Like this is like a joke.
Right.
Okay. If I was doing 100 kilos before the war, let's say in a bench press, um, now I'm doing like what, 30 kilos, and that's like hard for me, you know? So just accepting this new level that you're on and pushing through that, both mentally and physically, and in that physical activity, it actually releases those stresses. It releases all those things that are piped in you. Oh, that's a good way to say it, but that they're inside of you, pent up inside of you. Um, and then I also do hyperbaric treatments. So all of this, by the way, is on my own dime, by the way, because, and the reason why I'm throwing that out is because I think there's a misconception that fighting in this war is benefiting us in one way or other. Unlike U.S. military service members, which a lot of the people I see that are the most aggressive towards me online are either from Europe or from the United States, and it's again, you're projecting your ideas, your worldview on me. Our warfighters do not get handsomely paid to go fight in wars. In fact, I get a pay cut when I go and fight in war. So my salary is actually less during my deployments than if I were working. And that's everybody across the board. You get a subsidized version of your salary. So I'll give you an example. If I could work overtime and make more money because of overtime, then that's how I'm able to beef up my salary, right? At the end of the month. There is no overtime in the military. You get your 8 hours per day, and that is your salary. So even though I'm doing missions 24/7, I'm getting very little sleep, worn out, etc., there is no beneficial pay, okay? And then afterwards, when for all of us who have been injured, unless there's like a physical break in your body, you broke a bone or had some serious tissue damage to your body or to your brain or to whatever, to your hearing, etc., something you could prove in a medical procedure, that then therefore you can go and get therapy and physiotherapy and so on, that's basically sponsored by the Ministry of Defense. So sponsored, you get it from the Ministry of Defense, then you're actually paying out of pocket for all of these treatments. And so everything that I'm doing right now, this is out of pocket. I don't get any subsidy whatsoever for it. There were some kind of stipends, some kind of whatever's for, I think they had some kind of like mental psychotherapy stuff, and like it's very specific. So it actually doesn't fit into the treatments that I chose, right? So because each one of us are going to have different issues that we're working through and different therapies that we can use, but that's all out of our own pocket. So there is no net that's helping you do this. And I'm not doing this to get sympathy. I'm just pointing out that Israel right now is dealing with a lot more issues than just fighting in a war. We're dealing with trying to get back to our jobs, if at all. Many of us have either lost our workplace or can't go back and work because you're not mentally able to pick yourself up and to go and do that, because all you've known in the past few months is fighting terrorists. And now you're supposed to somehow act like everything's normal and go to work when you know still that there are hostages held, and that you look the mother or the family member in the eyes, which I did on my first day off from my first deployment, looking the mother in the eyes of her son, that it was still held in Gaza. And this mother, by the way, her son is still held in Gaza, and he happens to be one of those who's dealing with health issues and so on, and that, based on information that we have gotten, has not gotten those treatments throughout his whole captivity now. So we're talking over 500 days with serious health issues, and this young man is held there, and you're looking at his mother in the eyes as she's telling you her personal story about her son, and you're supposed to just act like everything's okay and just go and sit in a cafe and just act like to me, that's part of the battle. To me, for me, okay, this is part of my battle. And I know I'm not unique in that. I know I'm not the only one. because again, for any of us who are in combat, which is a small percentage of our military, for us, we carry that heavy weight on our shoulders. And I'm not saying that those who are non-combat don't, but there's a different mentality when you're the person that's been looked to for safety and security. You're the one that the society's looking at and saying, oh yeah, those are our war fighters. They're the ones that are going to defend us, and we're not able to do it, right? Um, so that's just some of hopefully that gives some perspective for some folks on the methods and things that some of us are doing, what I'm doing, and that's just something to consider if you yourself have been through some traumas, because you don't have to go to war to be experiencing PTS. You could experience it from abuse at home, or you were attacked on the street, or abuse at workplace, verbal abuse, mental abuse. There's all kinds of ways that people can get triggered and emotionally injured by. And again, I'm speaking beyond all these snowflakes and those that feel that their feelings were hurt because their order at McDonald's didn't come out the way they ordered it or whatever. I'm talking about real issues, real traumas, real because there is plenty of that, and unfortunately, that gets kind of clumped into. Oh yeah, everybody's triggered, everybody's hurt, everybody's offended by something, and that's just not true. There are plenty of people who are entitled and act like they've been hurt and choose to be hurt. They choose to be offended, and those people are just morons. But there are actual people out there that, unfortunately, I think they probably feel overlooked, and they feel like they're, um, adding their trauma into this whole pile load of just stupidities in society. And you know what I mean? They probably feel like, oh, if I say anything, if I, it's just like everybody, oh, everybody's hurting, everybody's this. No, there are lots of people out there who have real traumas from real offenses and hurts and things that happen to them. And you have to get help. You have to make sure you talk to your friends, to your family, or if you can't talk to your family, right? That's the worst. Find someone you can talk to, you can confide with, and you can work out those issues with, because if you don't and you just isolate yourself, that unfortunately leads down through a very dark spiral that eventually will lead to death. And you don't want to do that. It's not worth it. Um, and the best way you can fight back at those that hurt you is that you live your life. By taking your life, they got to win. Don't let them win. Be the one that says, you know what? I'm not going to let those that hurt me win. I'm going to live my life to its fullest, and I'm going to do my best to maximize the living of my life and the breath I've been given in my lungs to fulfill whatever dreams you have and aspirations. And if you don't have any, get some. Encourage yourself to look outside of that hurt and whatever that crud that you're living in, and just realize that your life can be much better through a change of attitude, a change of mindset, and don't get sucked into the darkness that is overweighing you. And yes, it's a real darkness. But I guarantee you, as one who's worked through a lot of those things personally, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but it takes yourself. You have to pick up yourself and like I said, confide in others, and don't fight this fight alone, whatever it may be.
Thank you, because I always like to end on a note of hope, and you just gave that very beautifully. I do want to also say that it's only within the context of this war and talking to so many Israelis that I have for the first time encountered sort of the reclassification in America, what we would call PTSD, and in Israel, it's called PTS, because it's not a disorder, it's reality. And it is something that can be overcome when you have faith and when you keep hope. And Doron, I put all your links so everybody knows where to find your podcast, your film project, your Cry for Zion, all the things. Is there anything else that you want to add before we finish up?
No, that's perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. And
You're
thank you for this time. Thank you for this interview. And I hope this benefited your listeners.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Kol hakavod. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing, not just for Israel, but honestly for humanity.
Thank you.